All right, here we
Well,
go.
so yeah, no, a couple pieces to what you said. Well, first off, just cool that you're plugging in more with those guys, and it seems like it might be a place where some of this can take root. And oh, there's another piece, but oh, that's okay. I'll come back to that. Yeah, no, I mean, I think the way you teed that up was really great. It kind of helps me frame. I mean, articulating that exactly that. I've spent so much time trying to find out how to answer that question well. And it's funny, I've been well, all right, this is interesting actually. I'll do this a couple different ways because I've been out of the like reading more philosophy and psychology space for the last couple months, which is what I was doing in there. It was basically just trying to get as good as I can with as many different terminologies as I could to understand it as deeply as possible to answer that question really well. That question being like, okay, there's all these things, there's circling, there's dialogos, there's different kinds of meditations and breathworks and relational, and there's all this kind of stuff. There's some through line that we're like, that's good. We should be doing that. And like, what is that through line? Why is it good? Why should we be doing it? And answering those questions really well. And on one side, I've gone really deep into like the philosophy and the psychology and trying to like, and the theology and the spirituality and like trying to get a little bit of my sense of that in at least a deep enough way that I can kind of feel settled in that and like reliably talk about it well. And there's always more to go, but I feel pretty good about that at this point. Um, and then and then there's what I'm doing with Relational Frontier, which is right now this yeah, this platform of trying to network together people doing this kind of stuff. Um, and I was talking to Guy about this a few months ago actually, and he was kind of circling me around like what I'm trying to do with the Relational Frontier. What is it for? And it really converges on this because it let's see if I can pull this off and like say this
Hmm.
coherently. Um so this insight came to me about like why am I doing this? And
Hmm.
I'm gonna invoke Jesus real quick. Not that I'm Jesus or anything like that, but like
Huh.
that there's this quality of people say like he's the word of like Jesus is the word of God. And I like kind of had this insight of like, oh, like one way of understanding what that means is like, for things in the world, for like a lamp, I have a word lamp. And like the word lamp isn't the lamp, but it like contains the logos. It is the logos of the lamp. It like contains what lamp is, even though it itself is not a lamp. Or like it is, but it participates in it in this weird way. And so I kind of had this thought of like, oh, like what is Jesus being the word of God? Like he's not a word, he's a person. What does that mean? But it's like, oh no, God is so much. The infinite is so infinite, such that the only word that could like adequately condense that is like a full person. Not only a full person, but like the full person. All right. So that's like really kind of highfalutin. But what I kind of realized is like, because relational frontier for me is both like this concept, like this kind of idea of like this moment, this like kind of cultural moment of this exploring of relationality, but it's also like an online platform that I'm building that is like a bunch of, code and files somewhere that people can make accounts on. And but they have the same name, and I'm like, that's confusing. Should I separate that? But I came to no, because in some sense, what I'm really trying to do with the platform is like the concept, this idea of that through line of the relational frontier is so complex that like the thing that can actually put its finger on what it is like you said, not like a 3 hour conversation so that can participate in it, but it's like a whole network of many, many people having 3 hour long conversations in one place, kind of with a through line. And like all the functionality of like how I'm trying to make it more geared toward connections and like people meeting each other and connecting It's like that's the relational frontier. And so the idea for me, and I hope, tell me if this is making any sense, of like what it is, what the platform, the relational frontier is like the word of the more dispersed thing, the relational frontier, the more the what would Jordan Hall call it? The hyperobject. There's the hyperobject that is the relational frontier like thing. And then there's like this finite thing, which is like this platform that I'm building that is trying to be like to symbolically participate in and gesture to the bigger thing. Does that land in
Yeah,
enough
yeah,
of a way?
absolutely. So let me see if I got it. So you're saying that, for example, the word lamp has a relationship to the object lamp, right? And it in some way the word lamp expresses the logos or captures the logos of the object lamp. In the same way that Jesus Christ, like the embodiment of God, right, or God incarnate, is like, or you could say captures the logos of God, as in I am the way and the truth and the light, like Jesus as the Word, right? So Jesus Christ is to God as the word lamp is to the lamp, roughly speaking. And in the same way, your platform, the Relational Frontier, is intended to have the same kind of relationship to something that it's trying to capture or express. And we might describe, and then I'm sort of trying to describe that something that we're trying to capture or express in
Yeah.
projects like the Relational Frontier. And it's something
Yeah. I
like,
can get into that side, but yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah, 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 yeah. Okay, awesome, awesome, awesome. And I want to keep trying to describe that which the Relational Frontier is trying to capture because I think that's a valuable inquiry. But I want to touch on just like why that's important or like what is it like why is that relevant or significant at all? And
Yep.
it seems to me that one of the main sort of least reductive, although still reductive, ways of boiling down the metacrisis, meaning crisis, is that it's an experience of deep disconnectedness. So where people are fragmented, where our attention is fragmented, where socially we're fragmented, psychologically fragmented, and that experience of fragmentation, I understand to be almost in essence diabolical.
Hmm.
I
Yep.
understand actually that the etymology of the word consumption, this is from a conversation with Benny, consumption comes from like to tear apart into little pieces, which is
Mm.
basically an expression of this left hemispheric functionality that I saw got out of hand like a very, very, very like millions of years ago that I see is now reflected in our fragmenting, the fragmenting of the world. And as we've been torn apart in that way by, let's say, the adversary, if you want to put it mythologically, obviously, like a fair take on the antidote to that, roughly speaking, although it is very rough, is how can we be not just in connection again, but much more deeply connected, like the quality of our connectedness. And there's something about it's not just about being connected to each other in the sense of like networking, right? It's about like in what way are we bound to reality? How do we experience reality? How do we experience life? How do we experience the world? How are we deeply connected to being with each other and being with our experience of living in real time? Um, and it seems like that maybe the central insight is in some way, again, roughly speaking, it's possible to be much more deeply connected and or less connected, right? And the fragmented modern condition is a a state or condition of being much less connected than we want to be, than we're supposed to be as human beings. I don't know. How
Hmm.
would you talk about like what I'm trying to describe there?
Yeah. No, I mean, I would use a lot of similar language. The connectedness language, I mean, definitely lands. Um, a book that I started reading and then haven't finished, but need to because I feel like a lot of these pieces are in there is Resonance by
Hmm.
Hartman Rosa. Do you know this one?
Yeah, yeah, it's been on my list for a little while. I'm writing it down again.
Yep, relist that bad boy.
Mhm.
I started it a few months ago, and then I kind of had fallen out of the kind of philosophy space a little bit. And but like, if anything's gonna get me back in, it would be that because
Mm.
it just holds it basically the core concept is this idea of oh gosh, I'm feel like I'm like my brain is not where I want it to be to have this conversation, which is unfortunate, but I'm gonna pull together what I can. Um well there's actually a couple concepts. There's resonance, another one is aliveness. And I got this from kind of the psychoanalytic traditions, particularly Thomas Ogden. He has a book called What Alive Means. And that's another really, really, really good book. And that's a short one too. Um and and I really have started kind of tuning into some of these notions of like when you're talking about connectedness, like the deep relatedness between like our sense of connectedness and our sense of aliveness and also our sense of realness. And 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 to use Rosa's words of like resonance, it's a sense of like what is within kind of resonates with what's without. And there's it's not like the boundary is gone, but there's a resonance between them. And oh my
Mm.
God, I wish I can pull it up right now. At least this one quote. Um, Ogden has this great way, or maybe it's him quoting Winnicott, talking about the psyche soma. Um,
Mm.
um, and he says, oh, where is it? Let me just find this real quick.
While you're finding that, you're just saying that our sense of realness, our sense of aliveness, and our sense of connectedness hang together in a deep way. And that as
Yeah.
we get more deeply in touch with what's really real, we're simultaneously like unlocking the depths of our own aliveness and actually feeling more connected to life itself.
So, all right, here's some of my quotes. This is I need to finish this blog post because I finished reading What Alive Means, and I also read Oscar Wilde's A Picture of Dorian Gray.
Mm.
And there's so many connections between them that I like kind of broke my brain trying to write a blog post about it. And I need to come back there at some point. But
Hmm.
there's this great quote, and I think you'll like this from Dorian Gray, which is to cure the soul by means of the senses, and the senses by means of the soul. So I can say that one more
Ooh.
time. To cure the soul by means of the senses, and the senses by means of the soul. And then, so Ogden also had this concept of the psyche soma, and kind of start to see how this maps. And he and how they're completely interpenetrated. And this is gonna wrap back around to answering your question, I hope. I think it will. Oh, we frozen.
Yeah, you're still there. Audio's okay, but there we go.
Oh, okay, we're good. Um, says the psyche here means the imaginative elaboration of somatic parts, feelings, and functions. That is, of physical aliveness. So you could say the soma is that, your physical aliveness, your somatic parts, your feelings, your emotions, kind of all that stuff that we talk about in circling. And then your psyche is your imaginative elaboration on that.
Mm.
And you can kind of
Mm-hmm.
pull in some John Vervaeke here of this
Mm-hmm.
idea of what's the word with the E? Oh my God, oh my brain is
Juice.
no, yes, but um the one where you do one fuck what the tongue, the thing that you always the reference with the tongue, you
Oh, exaptation. Yes,
exact
yes, yes, yes,
exactation,
yes.
yes.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant.
Okay. And so there's this quality of our psyche, our the psyche and soma being interrelated, and that is what gives our sense of aliveness. And we one of the main things of our disconnection that we can look at is this kind of Cartesian split of like the subject object, like our sense of subjectivity and like our kind of our sense of ourself as a mind, as a psyche, and then our objectivity, our sense of ourself as a body, as a physicality being separated. And
Mm.
that is the piece of this aliveness bit.
Mhm.
And how I want to, this is really messy, but I'm going to try to string this back together into connection because I think the thing that connection, both most intimately, like between people, but also at all these other levels with nature, with self, with God, all these kind of things. Um, but at least for me, why I've really clued in on like interpersonal relational practice as like the place to the place that's for me like been most cultivating of this is um that
Mm.
that there is this sense that we're in relationship, that psyche soma quality, that sense of I have a body with sensations and feelings, and then I have a mind that like makes stories about those and meaning and all that. That comes up in interpersonal relationships. Like we just can't get out of that. Like we just cannot get out of the fact that we are psyche soma, that we are, you
Mhm.
know, physically alive, experiencing, we are body experiencing beings, and we are like mind navigating beings. And in interpersonal relationship, we see that because I see all the ways that I project on you, and I see the ways that you say something, and I have like a weird little twinge in my stomach, and now I have a whole story about what came up when I was 10 come up. And it's like all of the ways that I am a psychic somatic being are just so present in relationship in ways that we really can't get around. And
Mm.
that for me has been such a ground of reconnecting is both,
Mm.
and again, it's through connecting with another person, but like my sense of like the brightness of the leaves and the realness and the aliveness of the trees outside are more as a result of that. Because through interpersonal practice, I'm more aware and in tune with the ways that my kind of imaginative psychic life and my somatic experience of myself are interrelated. And therefore, now they're more sensitive. And so it's like I can see a tree, and like the subtle ripple of somatic feeling that comes from that can be imbued with meaning, and I can be sensitive to it a whole way that has, in a non-woo way, the tree is inside me, and I'm outside myself. Because my experience of the tree is so much in my nervous system, in my meaning making.
Mm.
But it's like there's a trap here where it can seem like, oh, I'm still like kind of this Kantian thing of like I'm all stuck inside myself. But it's like
Mm.
it's and again, this is where I come back to like relational practice is part of what has me feel real is seeing you responding to me and experiencing you experiencing me is real and me experiencing you is real and me you experiencing me experiencing you is real and like that thing is like what our sense of realness builds on is our shared sense of oh it seems like when stuff happens over here there's a response over there that indicates like the psychic aspect of my life is real like it's not just you're not just responding to the physical sounds and the movements of me you're responding to my meaning making and my narratives and my stories and I can tell that by this subtle stuff that happens in relationship
Mm.
and so that was a pretty convoluted way that I could probably brush up how I talk about but convoluted way of saying that like our sense of realness is grounded in relationship and through that through experiencing deeper realness through interpersonal connection, I can experience deeper realness and aliveness and resonance with the world more broadly and with myself and all of this stuff. So that is my
Mm.
maybe best way that I could take a crack at answering the question, why is it important to do these things? Is because everything real builds off of that, and my sense of being alive and real and in resonance with the world um, can be honed through that. That's my best shot at taking a crack at that one.
Wow, that was incredible. And there's about 1,500 things that I would now like to bring up, but I'm sort of trying to now, hmm, in a sense, boil it back down, or like a part of what I hear you saying is, there's this idea that sort of vaguely spiritual people in a lot of traditions have had of like, hey, everything's interconnected. And that's just sort of like a phrase that's thrown around.
Hmm.
And rather than being an idea, a notion like that can, through practice, be drawn down into our real-time experience. So part of the understanding here is that right now there is a field of awareness which is between us and among us, that we participate in together in real relationship. And that real relationship between one and another actually depends on and comes out of that field. And that, what do I want to say about that? Well, that field is sort of comprised of it's kind of like in meditation where at the bottom of the exhale there's a little space of emptiness or nothingness.
Hmm.
And the idea is that in conversation where um so circling in a breathing, oscillating fashion in real time, and as we stop or land back in the real time experience of what's going on, there's a way of getting in touch with that quality. It's a maybe not the best kind of metaphor or analogy. I'm sort of trying to say that instead of just exchanging ideas back and forth, which is admittedly fun for people like us, right? Like part of what we're trying to do by practicing circling and the whole ecology of practices, is to allow our embodied experience in real time with sensations and feelings, intuitions to be much more present with us here, and and to make more space for our embodied somatic responses and reactions. And the idea is something like, if we do that, if we make more space in our dialogue for what's happening in real time, we can, through those sensations, through our senses, literally like get back in touch with this shared field, which is operating between us and which is in some ways holding the dialogue together. So this intuition, or it's a kind of directionality that by investigating sensation, by getting out of our head, literally by bringing the mind down into embodied experience in real-time
Hmm.
dialogue, that we can open through those sensations, those feelings, that real experience, whatever it happens to be in the moment, that we can open
Hmm.
through that to um, it's not exactly a thing. I mean, I'm hesitating to say something, but it's not a thing. It's more like a field. And I guess there's still the question. I mean, I keep coming back to this. Okay, but why is that important? Like, because it's sort of the sort of thing that where, unless you catch onto that, it's kind of like chasing the snitch, right? And but the people that have never heard of the snitch are like, well, why are you guys chasing that thing? Like, seems
Yeah.
crazy.
Well, maybe, all right, maybe I'll do this. I want to ask you,
Yeah.
why is answering the why is that important question important? Like, why do you, Sam, want to have a really good answer for that question? What would that afford?
I guess I have a really, really strong desire to like make sense to other people. I want to be intelligible. I want to be understandable
Hmm.
because I feel that when I'm not, when I'm not saying stuff that is relevant, it shuts me off from connection with other people, and I feel
Yeah,
deeply alone in that. So there's something
yeah.
about being able to answer that why question, which feels connected to my own capacity to be in deep connection with others.
Yeah. So being able, from hearing that, is like being able to answer that question. And because I'm kind of getting in the sense of like, this is the thing that seems like of deep most importance for me right now. And I want to be able to articulate to others why that's the case and also what that is. And maybe why they also should be, perhaps. And that if you could do that, you would feel less alone in that. Am I getting that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think I care very much to be known or to be knowable. I care to be accessible, even though I think there's clearly a part of me that likes to hide myself. But it's kind of like when we're talking about, I don't know, this between space or the field that holds dialogue together or something like that. I feel sort of existentially committed to that space.
Mhm.
I feel grounded in that or rooted in that, in my sense of who I am. And that's a weird experience to try to describe, but it sort of feels like the more I can point to that field, which is again occurring in real time right here, it's a constitutive element of our real time experience. The more that I can, in a sense, point to that, the more I feel I make myself vulnerable, the more I feel I make myself knowable.
Mm. Yeah. No, I noticed like as you kind of sunk into that question and really spoke to like the yeah, wanting to be knowable and there's this kind of existential rootedness and like a commitment to that. I noticed myself like feel a little more like slow, a little more grounded and yeah,
Mm.
and there's a quality of like being here in this kind of space where like at least I noticed for myself, like from here, the place in me that like wants a really good why answer feels a lot less frantic. Like I feel a lot of less of that kind of like stirring frantic energy. And
Mm.
I feel yeah, I mean it's partly just because I feel like more connected to the thing. Like it's like from this place of being in touch with it, it feels there's this quality of like givenness or like self-evidence that like has it yeah, not demand that in the same way.
Mm.
And and I think part of what has me sharing that, and I'll even share part of what had me ask the why, what's important about having a good answer to the why, is because I was imagining, and I noticed myself like slow down a lot because it when you mentioned like kind of the aloneness quality in it, because that felt really real. Um, because the place where I was imagining when I asked it was like imagining that if you had a good answer to why this is important, it would be easier to share it with the hope that like people would like catch on. And when I hear this is kind of related, I think I'm imagining this is related to this aloneness. It's like, oh, everyone, like it's really important that we do this together, like kind of or else. Like
Mhm.
there's like a or else somewhere in there. Not like a threat, but like a kind of a, things are gonna go off course. And and so that was kind of how I was imagining like the kind of existential import of answering that why is this all important question well. It's like it felt like it was if not necessary, at least really, really important in terms of like that mission. So it's like I'm kind of hearing both the personal aloneness in it, but also like kind of more global sense of it. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, that's quite an interesting space to explore while we're here. And like I think um like part of it, like I said, is like there's you could say it's a desire, it's a draw. I feel called to make myself knowable, to be available to others, to the other, which is a kind of call to radical vulnerability, which I find really scary. So that's not necessarily an easy direction to go. But I sort of feel um yeah, as I'm in real connection with you, for example, I'm being opened into the mystery in real time. Like more of me is made available as you call it out of me, in a sense. And that feels like the draw of life.
Hmm.
And so there's something about I do feel that it's this orientation towards what's most real that pulls me toward deep connection like this. Um, but yes, it is also I do have a an existential sense of things in relation to that that is not, I don't think, purely personal. Um, I mean, maybe it is, but I don't think it is because it's like I'm saying that it's deeply important to me to be knowable in that way and to, as I said, make myself available to be known. But I also think something like that there is that field which is between us has an awareness of its own that we participate in and that actually grounds our identities in real time. But that
Hmm.
awareness is in some way latent, or you could say unconscious. It's in a state of it's in a state of emerging into consciousness, I think. Or there's a way that our sort of normal, if you like, sober human consciousness interfaces with that field in its latency. And by interacting with that field and drawing it to our attention, it can actually be drawn into consciousness. It can be drawn into awareness in a profound way. And it just feels to me that by practicing together in such a way as to give rise to these coherent fields of awareness and to draw those fields, which I said are already here, right, already present, by drawing them into consciousness more, by more consciously and with intentionality participating in those fields, that there can be emergent properties of those fields, which basically are a better source of solution to the problems of the world. So rather than trying to sort of engineer problems to the metacrisis, meaning crisis from the ego mind, rather than trying to design solutions or do it all ourselves or try to use the existing institutions which don't work very well, I guess it is a kind of faith, but I think it's well-reasoned faith also that um, that it's by giving rise to these coherent fields of awareness that the kinds of response that are adequate and appropriate to the situation, circa, existential risk landscape, can emerge or arise. It's from out
Hmm.
of those fields that I think the solutions will come. Um, and it's a very different kind of reason. Um, I can also add reasons like I also think that tuning into that field is also just like the most fun thing to do. It's orienting toward the what's most real, which makes us feel most alive, that gives us a sense of what is most sacred. Um,
Hmm.
but I wouldn't want
Ooh,
to
okay.
cover that
So,
over, obscure that.
a couple things here is like for one, I feel like you just gave a pretty like at least a or at least a couple actually pretty good answers to the question of like why. It's like, well, why? It's like, well, we face existential risks as a human race, and it seems to me that it's good reason to believe, both reason and like participatory knowing in like a faith sense, that the kinds of solutions to face that come out of the emergent fields that come from this kind of real connection. That's like a pretty good why. If you want like a
Hmm.
sound bite, um, that's pretty good. Um, but also you said like, yeah, but that's also not like the only why. Like it's like also like, yeah, it's like fun and like feels good and you'll like experience more love in your life and like
Hmm.
like you feel closer to people, you feel less alone. Like there's like all these
Mm.
like those kind of reasons. And and one of the things I start noticing, like talking about like like I almost just want to say like, well, why? It's like, well, because it's good. Like just want to like put it
Yeah.
that way. It's like, well, and then I can tell you why it's good, but like or like why I think it's good, or like I can tell you a bunch of the good things about it. But like the sense that I'm getting here is like, yes, there's like some nested reasons, and like certain of these reasons will seem more relevant to different people. Like someone that's really kind of clocked into like the existential collapse in different ways. The person that's like really worried about it, like from the climate perspective, then you could talk about like, well, I think, the kind of solutions to that come out of this. Person that's worried about like, World War III, I think you can make a similar argument. The persons that like I don't really give a fuck about all that. I just kind of feel really lonely. There's a different reason that this is good that appeals to that person, and also we're we're like any person isn't just one of these. You have like some nested some of these different relevant things that the why should I do that is going to be some collection of those, and like some version of hearing that is going to hit. And so I think maybe where I feel like it might be easy to get caught like spinning our wheels is this quality
Mm.
of like, well, there's a why, there's a best reason that will appeal to maximum number of people,
Mm.
and it can be easy to kind of like look for that. And it's like, because like yeah, in some sense, at like a logical level, that I could say that like the existential threat one should appeal to the most people because that applies to everyone. But like not everyone is kind of framing the situation such that they're thinking about it that way. So even if like logically I could say,
Mm.
well, why should I do circling? It's like, well, because the world might end if we don't. It's like, okay, well that's one way to put that. And like we can unpack it, and that's like a whole hole we could go down. Or I can be like, you'll feel less lonely. And then be like, oh, okay. Like that's all I
Mm.
need to hear. Like don't talk to me about the fucking civilizational collapse. Like I could give a shit, but like I feel kind of sad today. And and I think that's where this conversation gets tricky. Is like I don't feel like there's a why that is like
Mm.
universally appealing, other than like that it's good and that it actually meets a great many whys. And
Mm.
the thing that keeps coming up for me around this, and I actually don't really know where I'd go with this, but like this is where like the space of like story gets a lot more interesting to me. Because it's like, oh, at the end of the day, I'm not actually trying to sell you like a reason. Like there's a great many reasons. What I'm wanting is actually to invite you into a story, like a shared meaningscape. Like, for you, I really get the sense of like the kind of game B existential self-terminating collapse thing. And like that this is the like that's like the story that you live in, and myself too in a great many ways. Or at least part of my mind definitely does. Um, and it's like it's not just like I want you to I want to tell you the why, but I want to invite you into the story in which that why makes sense. Um,
Mm.
and and that feels like a different thing because now I'm not just giving you a why, I'm giving you like a frame, a narrative, and like an arc. And so again, I'm not really sure where to go with that, but like that like changes the question for me. It's like, oh, why should we do these things? Or it's like, what's the way of making sense of the world that has it self-evident that I should do these things? And what's the story? How do I talk? How do I invite into that story? And that's another question, but that's kind of
Mm.
how where this is taking me.
Wow, amazing, amazing. I want to try to sort of like apply some of the quotes that you used self-reflectively to our conversation. Because you were basically just sort of saying that there are like multiple different perspectives that you can take, not only multiple different reasons that might appeal to different people, but maybe some people are fundamentally motivated by a part that feels lonely within them, or a part that feels more fearful, is more present, or the part that feels more desirous, like wants more of the real or the good. And these are all different perspectives or that one can take up. Um, and in the same way, it seems like we're sort of orienting to the ground from out of which why can even be asked. So like the fact that we can
Yeah.
even ask why, right, sort of presupposes a kind of existential stance that we're trying to, it seems to me, call attention to.
Yeah.
And you sort of spoke about this. I mean, this concept of the psyche soma reminded me of the body mind from, I guess, Buddhism.
Hmm.
And it's you're sort of talking, it seems to me like um again, psyche is sort of identified with soul, if I'm not mistaken, at least in some Western traditions. Psyche and soul are
Yeah, I
essentially
agree.
the same. And it's kind of like if in the body we have these uh somatic experiences in real time, whether we call them feelings or emotions or sensations, and we experience them within the body, but then they rise into the psyche, they rise into the mind or the soul in the form of beliefs or in the form of like there's a way that things are translated, I think, from sensation up into emotion and then into cognition. And we're sort of talking about that through line. And there's a way that, what am I trying to describe here? It's quite difficult to describe. I'm sort of saying that there's like it seems that there's like a common ground from out of which any of those sensations arise. Um, I don't quite know how to talk about that either, but I'm sort of saying that it seems like those sensations, we personify them into different parts. Imagine that we use the terminology of internal family systems or something like that. So there's a part that's afraid, there's a part that's desirous, there's a part that's, I don't know,
Hmm.
oriented to
Hmm.
the good, and there's a part that cares, or there's a part that wants to give more, or, and so on and so on. It seems like that they all have a common basis, and yeah, it's that's difficult to talk about what I mean by that without getting more spiritual or you could say metaphysical. But I'm sort of saying that each of those different perspectives that different people might embody, like imagine that there's someone who's more worried about existential risk and someone just kind of wants to do circling and connect with people, and these people, they're embodying different parts, they're embodying different perspectives. But in a way, well, but both of those perspectives are here, right? Like that, both of those people, like in real time, are giving expression, are giving voice, are giving rise to something which is before or which transcends any perspectives. So the idea is something like whatever perspective someone can take up, any perspective, literally like all of the perspectives, they share like a common source. In internal family systems, if I use that analogy, it's called the self. It's like all of these parts are sort of coming from this, in a sense, common core, which in internal family systems is called the self.
Hmm. Yeah, in circling, the third agreement, the listen to the deepest cut of each other's humanity. And that's been very much how I've been when I do circling events and like do the agreements. That's basically exactly how I describe that. I always say like, listen for that in someone else, like kind of under everything else, under our opinions and beliefs and perspectives. There's this core, I can't even say experience. There's this core event, this core happening of being a human person in the world, kind of getting tossed around by fate, having all sorts of experiences that shape everything. It shapes the whole deal. And and even if all of the shapes are different between you and me, I can always listen for that core unfolding that we both participate in. Um, this is the other thing I really liked about Hartman Rosa is the sense of like the self-world relationship is like that is one thing we all have in common is we have a self-world relationship. I have a sense of a self and I have a sense of a world, and there's some way that those are related to each other that shapes everything I experience.
Hmm.
And all of those are going to take on many different shapes, but that kind of core structure of like the self-world relationship, we all like that. To me, that's been the language that I've come to at least the best speak about that underlying that you're pointing to.
Can I ask you something about that? Because that feels like a very valuable central topic. And I know that like Viveki talks about self and world as this kind of, yeah, this attunement between self and
Yeah.
world that gives rise to our participatory knowing, which is like, core to his kind of framework, I guess you could say. And
Yep.
I guess I'm wanting to ask about that. Um, I want to tie in symbols a bit here. And
Hmm.
like I'm resonating with like earlier you were talking about the really real. You were talking about this intersection of feeling most deeply connected, feeling most deeply alive, and feeling called to what is really real, what's more real than real, or what's most real. And I understand through Viveki that there's something you could say that's really real that binds us internally, that allows us to be internally coherent. And there's also something at the same time that binds us to the world, that allows us to be coherent when bound to the world. And I think that is the self-world relationship. There's something that binds the self together, and there's something that binds the self to the world. Does that sound like, does that, how does that intersect with your understanding of the really real in, because the connection here is religio, right? Religio as that which
Hmm.
binds internally and that which binds self and world. Where
Yeah.
religio is something like a secular root of religious and spiritual practice that can give rise to this sense of internal binding and binding to the world without getting us stuck in doctrinal belief, like without getting us stuck in mutual antagonism as a result of having different creeds, because we're literally coming from not our creeds or not our different perspectives, but the common root of all creeds and the common root of all perspectives, which is something like this sense of the really real, which Viveki describes with the term religio, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a couple ways. I don't remember all the exact mappings, but it's something like that. And yeah, and that is it definitely intersects to some degree to what I'm pointing to with the self-world bit here. Um, um, Let me see. Because yeah, no, I really like that you brought in like symbol and religio and
Mm.
yeah,
Can I add something
I mean,
else?
yeah,
Sorry to cut you off. I just feel
it's
like
okay.
earlier we were talking about the etymology of consumption, which is inherently diabolical, meaning like to take apart or to fragment into many little pieces. Whereas the etymology of symbol literally means to gather together,
Hmm.
and which is like almost the perfect inverse or the perfect opposite. And I'm sort of like I understand, for example, through people like Jung and others that um, essentially we started to live in a very fragmented way. Specifically, I think we started to farm and then live in a sedentary way and then built walls everywhere. And then we got class structures. And with class structures, basically you live in a way that's much more fragmented. Some people live over here and they do that kind of thing. Some people live over here and they do that kind of thing. And specifically, what those people lose is the capacity to take on and take off different perspectives. Whereas I'm sort of saying that people who are living in a more nomadic and tribal context, I'm imagining, had a better skill, better facility with taking on one role in one moment and another role in a different moment, depending what was required at the time. Whereas when people are living in a sedentary, class structured way, they, I would say, tend to be more identified with one particular role and performing that role continually and losing this capacity for taking on and off different perspectives in real time. What I wanted to say about that is that uh, sociological fragmenting is reflected within our psyches, where specifically we feel that our faculties for feeling and sensing and thinking and intuiting, just as examples, we feel that they are different faculties. And I'm saying that that itself is a symptom of our fragmenting, a fragmenting of our inner world. And I'm saying that specifically, it's not just because we started to live in a more fragmented way, but because we lost a sense for our inherently symbolic cognition. And that if we can tie symbols back in, symbols as that which bind the abstract and the sensory, that which bind the subject and the object back together, by gathering together all of these different parts, all of these different perspectives, all of these different faculties within our cognition. So there's something here for me where symbols end up being really centrally important for binding back together that which has become fragmented, because they can literally gather together uh, things which are very hard to express in words. Some things can only be expressed in the form of symbol, I think, or an image and artistry and dance and song and so on.
Yes, to that last bit and to a lot of it. Um, I'll say I'm afraid I've like lost a thread a little bit. And not that I don't have stuff to say to that, I do, but there's um whatever is orienting me in terms of what thing that I could say to that, I have lost. Um, is there a way that you could just put a question on the end of
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
or
yeah.
yeah, propose like what, yeah, what feels relevant right now? Because I think I was tracking a couple pieces here. Yeah, maybe I'll like recap a little bit. It's kind of orient, like yeah, this quality of. It was really interesting the bit you added about like having more rigid kind of societal role structures, kind of um, limiting or like yeah, like calcifying our ability to like switch into different kind of participatory knowing, into different agent arena relationships, different ways, different roles that I'm assuming, different worlds that I'm putting on, and I kind of have a fixed version of that. That's actually that's very good. Um, and
Hmm.
yeah, well, I guess one thing that I got snagged on during that is because there's this question, and I feel like this is kind of debated in some of these spaces of like, I think there's like one camp or one school of thought that's like, well, we just need to go back to being
Hmm.
living tribal lives, and like that'll fix everything. And the
Hmm.
others are like, well, no, there's actually a lot of problems with tribal lives that we can kind of romanticize away. And so it's like not that. And Jordan Hall, like Civium, and these kind of different answers to that kind of thing, where it's like,
Hmm.
how can we kind of get the Dunbar stuff and the close relationships and that whole thing while still having the kind of benefits of like larger networks. Um, and so that's like a piece over there, and I think that's separate. And I think there is something of like the current cultural moment that's interesting in terms of not identifying with role or at least job in the same way,
Hmm.
um, for a number of reasons. Um, and so like that's here. Um, but like, I don't know if we're going into sociology right now or like symbol or like story. So yeah, I guess that's what I'm like orienting. Like there's a bunch of juicy pieces here, and like what feels like
Hmm.
relevant thread for you.
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess. Hmm. I don't feel the need to go sort of deep into the sociology. I think we can. I'm sort of more oriented in this moment about like what is it about symbols that are important.
Hmm.
And because I'm sort of tying this back into whether it's through utopia or whether it's through dystopia, it seems like people are probably going to naturally form tribal size groups. But that's probably in a way that avoids Ken Wilber's pre-trans fallacy, right? It's not about going back to what we've lost although we can certainly learn a bunch of important insights from indigenous wisdom traditions, for example. But it's about going forwards to something that new, something that hasn't been seen before, because the world is very different, right? And specifically because that diabolical spirit of fragmentation seemed as if it sort of won, like we got stuck in multipolar traps that led to tribal warfare and so on, that it seems that indigenous wisdom traditions couldn't really cope with, unfortunately. And so as much as I am a proponent of like readopting indigenous wisdom insights, for example, like I talk a lot about Tyson Yunkaporta from my own country, for example, but we're clearly going to need, in a sense, other pieces to come along with that. And I feel there are pieces here about a meta tribal network. There are pieces about egregores that I think we've spoken about before that's relevant here. There's stuff about how artificial intelligence intersects with a cultural practicum for the 21st century that I think is also relevant. And I guess to me, symbols end up being a part of that. Like I'm sort of saying there's a way that the left hemisphere sort of got out of hand, out of control, and was able to fragment and tear apart the fragile sphere of human culture. And in essence, it's like if we want to cope with that or deal with that properly, we in a sense need more culture. There's like the idea being that there are specific ways of being together that can give rise to more right hemispheric uh, so forms, like sociologically and culturally. And I don't know how to exactly talk about that, but I'm sort of saying that humans sort of worked out how to do something together, and that is human culture. So sort of like culture as an engine for love and abundance, something like that. And by leaning more in that direction, like cultural innovations, rather than innovations that are more technological, like can we make some space for more cultural flavor of innovation? And I think restoring a sense for symbolic cognition is a core part of that. And I'm attuned to how something is trying to speak through us from the depths of our being, and that symbols can give voice to that. And I think to me, this is why symbols end up being such an important part of like integrating symbolic cognition into a variety of different practices. Um, and I guess I'm just wondering, whoop, I can't hear you right now. Are you there? Our connection seems a little dodgy. I'm just checking that we can hear each other. Looks like a no, you're on mute, I think.
Oh,
Whoop, there we go.
oh, there we go.
I wonder if that will just sort of keep recording or start a new one. Anyway, I guess to boil that down into a question, I'm sort of wondering again about your perspective here. I'm genuinely curious about
Hmm.
what you think, and I find you a wonderful dialogue partner, and we're able to get to some really deep places together that I find profoundly valuable and meaningful. And I guess I'm like, yeah, in terms of being able to present an ecology of practices to the retribalized people and say, hey, like what we should get up to is dialectic into dialogos and circling and so on and so on. How do you have a sense of how symbols can fit
Mhm.
into that, or how artistic practice can fit in? Or do you have any thoughts about, yeah, like how to intentionally design a curriculum that gives adequate expression to these different pieces that we've been talking about? It doesn't all have
Hmm.
to be sociological analysis. It can be, hey, let's make art together. Let's sing and dance
Yeah.
together.
Oh, that's juicy. Okay, cool. Yes, I do have thoughts on that. Couple things. Actually, I have two people before I have thoughts. Um, one is the my pilot community on Relational Frontier. Renee Bryant. She has a pretty big Instagram called the Play RX or the Play Cure, and she does a lot of like imagination and play and creativity based stuff for adults. And she just started her community, the Play RX Circle. And so she does a lot of great stuff around, yeah, imagination and art and play and creativity. That in terms of just like practices and ways to like get people into that, she has lots of good stuff. Um, and also Aaron Cantor. Um, He was a friend of mine and one of the facilitators with Rafe at the Evolve Move Play. And I'm actually doing a course with him right now on storytelling. He's like an amazing storyteller. I don't know if you've seen any like Martin Shaw or these kinds of folks. Um, yeah, storytelling. That's I would drop that right in the center in terms of like
Mm,
things that talk about retribalize, like telling stories around the fire. Like that is
mm,
in our guts. And I think like learning, not like, well, not just like reading, but like memorizing old fairy tales and stories and myths and telling them again, not just like from rote memory, but like tell them how a bard would tell them. I think that is in terms of ways to like get the kind of symbolic mythic imagination going and like that kind of scene.
mm,
Um, yeah, hearing stories, hearing and reading lots of stories. I feel like my reading has moved more to fiction the last
mhm,
little bit for exactly this reason, because like it does it works at a kind of level that's yeah, it's different.
mm,
And but also yeah, like learning to tell stories. I'm learning to do Jack and the Beanstalk right now, and I've been like practicing and like all of the little nuances of like adding your own little flavor and your own little thing while having like the core kind of mythic structure that everyone knows. The fee fi fo fum and like goes up the stock and the beans and all of that. But like finding the ways to like bring your experience into it and like all the ways of like developing my voice that's coming out of it, but also like my relation to all the different symbols and images and like the kind of way that I like enter into it is such a training in that. And just listening to a story does the same thing but from a different place. Um, so that's in terms of like one thing that I could say is like the most in terms of like developing ecology or practice of how to get more deeply acquainted with symbol. I would say storytelling and story listening would be high up there for me.
mm. Yeah, well said. Well said. And I was thinking there's something about stories where if they're evocative stories, like if they're good stories, then they allow us to imagine, right? We can put ourselves into the narrative in real time. Like we experience the narrative as it's unfolding. There's a very visceral sense that we get of that as we're reading a great fiction book, right? That we're in it and we're gripped by it. And there's something about being situated, like listening to it, listening to a good story like that involves being situated in that story as the real character. One can sort of take on the perspective of the main character in real time in a way that's
Yep. And
very
this,
imaginative.
yeah, and this addresses exactly the thing you said earlier about like having fixed roles in society, limiting our ability to take on. That is so much what stories do, is have us take on a different agent arena. I'm a
Mm,
different kind of self in a different kind of world.
mhm,
And and Tolkien has this great quote, or at least a sentiment. I don't know if I can pull the quote right now, but like to the criticisms that like fiction is just escapism. It's like it doesn't actually apply to the world. And he goes, no, it couldn't be further from the truth. Because what you do in a good story is you go in and you get this new agent arena relationship, this new self world, and and it allows you to come back and see your regular life from a new place. There's actually a whole different way, because it's not just yeah, it's not just I'm seeing things that I wouldn't have otherwise. I'm imagining different things. It's like my way of seeing, my mode of relating self to world actually gets
mm,
played with. And
mm,
that kind of fundamental thing I can kind of shimmy around and then come back into life and see with new eyes. And
mm.
so yeah, I think the story and myth and fiction just like hit so many of these layers.
Wow, wow, wow. You're making me think of Copernicus, who is the guy who was like, hey, the sun is at the center of the solar system, not the Earth. And it's kind of like everyone was sort of stuck in the story in the perspective of, oh, of course the earth is at the center, right? And that was like built into their view of things, their experience of the world. Literally their worldview was founded on the earth sort of being at the middle. And sort of Copernicus
Yeah.
came along and with brilliant imagination and insight and genius, he was like, hey, no, we can see and calculate how the sun is actually at the center. And that literally like broke apart the world. Everyone was like, wow, the imagination that requires, was incredible. And it led to people like Giordano Bruno, who basically saw that the stars were of an infinite distance. He saw that the stars were not all in a sphere, like one layer,
Mm.
but that they had different distances. And he was like, "Whoa, there's like an infinity there." And they actually burned him at the stake for that because that amount of imagination was just like really unacceptable.
Right. Well, isn't that something? Like the imagination. And it's funny to put it this way. It's like the same reason people get so triggered around flat earthers. It's like, because on one hand, you can say, like, oh, there's no science, it's all bullshit. It's like, yeah, that's fine. I'm not saying the earth is flat, but I'm just saying the emotional reaction people have to that. Like the anger, the fact that you would believe the earth is flat. It's the same thing. It's a lack of imagination. It's like, well, yeah, because it's not. Because, yeah, don't tell me that you're just mad that they're, like, not believing the science. Like, that is true. But what makes you mad is that they are approaching the world from a perspective where instead of the like greatest authority on how the shape of the earth is being like scientists that are saying here's how the science looks, trust me, they're saying what do you mean these authorities have lied to us about all sorts of things, that is not what I'm going to trust. I'm going to trust my immediate experience, which is it looks like things are fucking flat. And we can argue about that or whatever. I'm not saying it is, but I'm just saying that takes a degree of imagination that I think the people that get really triggered about flat earthers actually don't have.
Mm, mm,
And or at least it's hard to inhabit. So I think it's the same kind of thing. And there is this quality of like, I mean, to talk about symbols and maybe this is the place where we can start to land the plane because whenever you start bringing Jesus in, it gets all
yeah.
screwy. But I mean, once I really started going down the kind of narrative and story and symbol path, like Christianity is not institutional necessarily, but like Jesus Christ as a symbol and the idea of like the incarnate God being the central figure that holds everything together got increasingly appealing because there's this great, I think it's C.S. Lewis, one of these cats, said something about like that Jesus is like the lens through which he sees everything else. And because one of the things when I really started going deeper into Christianity, I realized is like, oh, if it does nothing else, it stretches my imagination to the absolute limit. Like, as I've taken that story more seriously and more deeply and internalized it in deeper ways, nothing, like nothing feels outside the realm of things that I can think about. Like, I can not understand all sorts of shit for sure. There's all, it's not like I'm know everything, obviously, but like, it's like nothing seems off the table as like, it pushes my imagination to such a degree that really out there shit doesn't mean I necessarily believe, but like, I can wrap my head around how someone could believe.
Mm,
Um, and there's a real value in that I've found, especially in circling, like circling someone with like a radically different world than I have, like through a combination of just having practiced that kind of perspective taking a lot, and also really kind of push the edges of imagination. Um, that has really done a lot for like getting someone with a radically different world than me,
mm,
and and again, like art and like poetry for sure. Poetry has this sense of like, oh, to really get this poem, like I need to like contort my psyche into a shape that is not normally in to fit inside this thing. And and I think philosophy does that too to a degree. But
mm,
I saw a really great note on Substack a while ago that someone said uh, philosophy is a hospital for sick poets. And oh, I just love that so much. And there's this sense of like, okay, my imagination is stuck in the worldview that I have. I'm gonna use kind of logic and reason to push the bounds of that worldview until it like exceeds the grasp of my logic and reason, such that I need symbol and story and song and poetry to be the language of my mind. And I just,
mm,
I just love that sentiment.
mm.
But anyways, I'm rambling a little bit now, but there's some stuff.
No, no, beautifully said. And we can definitely wind it to an end. I wanted to say, in terms of the Christian story, what has most impacted me as a layperson, humble onlooker, I would say. Um, what's most impacted me is like an embodied sense of relationship with Christ. I think it's like what I'm talking about is not so much what anyone believes. What I'm interested is not so much in what anyone believes, but more about how they actually experience the world in the light of the stories that they have incorporated, meaning taken into their bodies. So to what degree are they able to incarnate or manifest, bring into the world to actualize the sentiment of that story in their life? And
Hmm.
and even then, that's still a bit like it's quite cognitive way of putting it, Sam. But it's kind of like no, there is like a real visceral sense of experiencing the world in a different way as the result of incorporating those particular stories, and that's real. That's
Hmm.
not arguable, in a sense. And so that's kind of what I'm curious about, and I was reminded of a practice that I was doing yesterday as part of a breathwork retreat that I'm helping to assist at the moment, where in this exercise, like you imagine sitting with a partner and one of you lies down into corpse pose, shavasana position from yoga, and then their friend, their guide, asks them to connect with different parts of their body, so like the feet, the legs, the belly, the heart, the throat, and the face. And the exercise is to, when the person connects with each part of the body, to speak the sentence that first comes to mind. It's as simple as that. And then their friend who asks them, hey, now connect with your feet and then connect with your legs, they write down each of these sentences so that they're left with about 6 or 7 sentences. And then this person will curl into the fetal position and kind of connect with this quality of innocence and childlikeness. And the person, in a kind of loving and caring, gentle way, will read back the sentences to them. And that's like a very simple exercise that I just described. And then you kind of like swap over and, you know, do it in the other direction. But the point that I'm making is that there was something about doing that exercise where even though it was very simple, it really helped me to build a relationship with the embodied sense of each of these parts of the body in a kind of way that Vipassana meditation does, right? Like by body scanning, like for an hour or more every day, you can build intimacy, you can build familiarity, you can build connection with different parts of your somatic experience. And in the same way, that's kind of like drawing consciousness down into embodied awareness. But there's a way that by giving voice to different parts of the body, you can sort of draw the body up into
Hmm.
cognition or up into expression in a way that interfaces beautifully with internal family systems, um, which is more psychological in a sense. And I just felt like naming that as in like we were talking a lot about the relationship between the soul or psyche and the body. And I think there are practices that can really directly support that interface. And I mean, to me, this is also deeply theurgical kind of practice in the sense of
Hmm.
the embodied Neoplatonism of Iamblichus, writing out of the 4th century CE, integrating Pythagoras and Plato and Aristotle, blah, blah, blah. There's a reason that Aristotle said that Christianity is kind of like the continuation of the Platonic and Neoplatonic tradition. So
Hmm.
something about this in theurgy, it's these practices that involve and presuppose embodiment, that involve ritual and rite, right? And they're a way of honoring the different components of our somatic embodied experience. Like, for example, giving adequate space to the part that feels afraid, actually feeling deeply into that which is really lonely in real time, feeling the sense of existential aloneness. And there's a way that I know this is a certain kind of interpretation of that particular Neoplatonic tradition, but what I'm sort of getting at is that if we can sort of make more space for our somatic experience in real time and for the sensations, feelings, emotions, and parts that we often, as modern people, repress, if we can make more space for them, there's a way of, in a sense, I think you were talking about, it's a sort of reciprocal feedback loop between our body and our psyche, where our body can become purified, in a sense, can release that which has been holding for a very long time. Um,
Hmm.
in a way that can, yeah, allow us to, I think, spiritually develop would be the way of putting that, or emotionally develop as well. I just see how that kind of, in a sense, modern psychosomatic practices like that involve visualization and imagination and connection with the body can also draw on like very old traditions and interface beautifully with a philosophy that is deeply practical. And that feels
Yeah.
like, yeah, I mean, again, I'm sort of left without a question, but I feel like we said a lot of things and they were all like pretty much on the money. And I just feel like I love circling around this like central theme of you of like trying to access and tap into the between space and trying to boil that down and condense that and express that and draw it out and elaborate it in different ways that can all be put into like a practical program. We're talking about a philosophical paideia, an educational program involving philosophy, but also involving ritual practice and a whole ecology of practices that we've been talking about. At least for me,
Hmm.
that's what it's about. So
Yeah.
where does that
No,
leave
and I
you?
and I so enjoy that that is what it's about for you because that is such a fun space to play in. Like there's just like so much exploration in terms of yeah, what does looking put in a curriculum or a education or a yeah, like I one of the things I've really wanted to get into is I have a friend. It's actually a well, do you know Jacob? He's a friend of Benny's.
I don't know him. I know of him. I haven't met him yet.
Okay, yeah. So he actually lives out around here. He actually
Mm.
is friends with do you remember James from circling?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so they know each other really well.
Hmm.
Um and um and Jacob's done a bunch of like wilderness rites of passage kind of stuff. And I'm really into been wanting to get into that more because that
Mm.
seems like a really cool embodied place to bring a lot of this together. It's
Mm.
like, do like a men's retreat for a week where we're gonna like tell a story and do you know, circle around bonfires and all this kind of stuff and like get in nature and in our bodies. Anyways, um, yeah, so I just really enjoy getting into the kind of creative designing, both theorizing and like practically applying space with you. And I just really appreciate this 'cause I feel like nicely enlivened too.
Mm.
I I actually had a moment during this call where I was like, ooh, I want to like write more again, which I haven't felt in a little bit, which is fun. Like I've like kind of like vaguely thought, but like feeling the energy for it was very
Mm.
nice and like um yeah. No, there's something about the space that opened up between us that I really enjoy. And it
Mm.
just feels like very creative and energized. And so yeah, so I appreciate you bringing that out of me.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, for me, it's very, mutually inspiring and reconnects me with, the source of what is meaningful, the source of like why we're doing all this, or at least why I'm doing all this. And so it feels like, yeah, to me, it's a unique space. Like we can address questions and go on explorations that I can't do with anyone else. And that feels like very, like priceless in the sense of being uniquely valuable. So, yeah, thank you so much for joining me. It's really my
Mm.
pleasure. We leave it there.
Sounds like a good spot to end it as any.
All right. I'm gonna try to stop the